Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'm going to bring you my review of Cthulhu by Gaslight's Keeper's Guide from Chaosium Inc. This 264-page hardcover is making its way into stores. It does carry an MSRP of $49.99. That actually includes the PDF if you order from Chaosium Inc. The PDF alone, I do not have an official price on yet. I am going to guess it'll be $24.99 once it's made available over on, say, Drive-Thru RPG or Chaosium Inc.'s website. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the Keeper's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight. A few things to mention before we dive on in. First of all, my friends over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what's inside. And then lastly, this is for the eyes of the keeper only. So if you are a player, an investigator, and your keeper has picked up Cthulhu by Gaslight, maybe they haven't started running it, or maybe they are running it, but they're awaiting getting their hands on the Keeper's Guide to expand upon it. There are going to be some spoilers as we flip on through and I talk about the Keeper's Guide. Also, the last 70 pages or so of the book is comprised of a couple of adventures. I'm going to say spoiler-free discussing those, but there will be some spoilers as I just flip on through it. So I'm just warning you up front. If you are an investigator, this is not meant for your eyes. All right, so let's jump on in. First thing we're going to do is take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks work very hard to bring this to life. So we've got the various different authors. We also get credit for authors of previous editions. Now, Cthulhu by Gaslight previously has been a supplement for earlier editions of Call of Cthulhu. This is actually a standalone game, or it's being marketed as a standalone game, and Cthulhu by Gaslight has been broken up into 2 volumes. The Investigator's Guide, which I have reviewed. In fact, I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. I liked it quite a bit. And then, of course, now we have the Keeper's Guide. Now, this has been under embargo until today. So this is the first day I've had an opportunity to actually talk about the Keeper's Guide. I have had it for about a week, just so you know, but I was under embargo from Chaosium Inc., which usually is not a good sign, I gotta say. And I'm not calling Chaosium Inc. out on anything, but a lot of times when there's an embargo on a game release, it usually means the publisher knows that there's going to be mixed reactions to it, or maybe negative reactions to it. So I did think it was a little strange that there was an embargo. So as I mentioned, this is designed as a standalone game. I will get into more detail about that later on in this review. The vast majority of the rules that you need in order to play or run Cthulhu by Gaslight is located in the Investigator's Guide. There are some new options. There are some new rules that do expand upon that in this Keeper's Guide. And the majority of the book itself, outside of those adventures, is more information about the Victorian era and Victorian England as well. So before we kind of get into the nitty gritty here, do want to mention that the production quality, very solid, nice paper stock, pretty matte finish. There's a little sheen to it, but not a terrible amount. Artwork throughout is very solid. There are some spooky images, and then there are some images which are just kind of slice of life. I know with the Investigator's Guide, there were some folks out there who were critical of the artwork. I think the artwork is fine for the most part throughout. There are a couple of pieces in here that I'm kind of like, Okay, all right. Not really getting my creative juices flowing, but still. So, one of my critiques of this Keeper's Guide is that it feels like it's a jumble. There's a lot of fantastic content in this book. Do not get me wrong, but it just doesn't seem to be logically presented. So, as an example, we'll start off here, and there's discussion about workhouses, which, of course, are an important element in Victorian era England, as well as Victorian era literature plays a big role. A lot of main characters, a lot of protagonists in fiction during that period originate in a workhouse or find themselves in a workhouse. So we get a bit of information about that. And then suddenly we jump into these floor plans of different buildings, villas, country houses. Here's one of the workhouse here. And then suddenly we jump back, sort of, and we get into crime and punishment. So it's kind of like, why do we have these floor plans here? Shouldn't they maybe be later on in the book? And that's something that sort of plagues this Keeper's Guide. Something that seems out of place pops up, and then you kind of go back to the topic on hand. It's a little odd. As far as the crime and punishment, we will get some information about famous crimes, famous criminals. Strangely enough, though, and here's the image. As soon as I saw this, I was like, wait a second, that's H.H. Holmes. Well, that was one of his aliases. And that is the murder castle in Chicago, which no longer exists. I thought, wait a second, why are we getting an image of H.H. Holmes? And then there's a page devoted to the murder castle, which the reality is most people feel that the supposed tally of people that Holmes killed is way, way, way exaggerated. Sometimes you hear almost, as many as 200 people, when the reality is it was probably about 10, which is still horrific. Don't get me wrong. But it's kind of like, okay, so this is supposed to be Victorian era England. Why are we getting this? I mean, it's cool. It's fine. It's all right. It's just kind of weird. We do have a section on asylums, which is very, very short. I thought that was a little unusual. And then we'll get into some fictional criminal gangs that you can utilize. One of the largest chapters of the Keeper's Guide is Occult Secrets and the Golden Dawn. This is where we'll get into the Golden Dawn, and it's up to the Keeper's discretion. Is the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn going to be just a bunch of cranks, which probably what it was in real life? Or is it a real organization made up of magic users? What sort of magic is it? Is it tied into the mythos? Is it powerful magic? Is it pretty weak magic? So we have those options available to the Keeper there. We get some new spells. We get rules for astral combat as well as astral travel, which became a fad. It became a fad belief, I guess we'll say, during this period. So I thought that was kind of cool. Then we'll move into some tomes. And there is some redundancy with our Mythos tomes, with the Keeper's Guide for Call of Cthulhu. We do get some new ones as well. Then we get a section. Once again, this is one of these sections where suddenly this doesn't seem structured logically. So we start off with a discussion about problematic content, which I completely understand. So this section's about running Gaslight games and the various different troublesome things about the period. And are you going to kind of gloss over those? Are you going to ignore those? Are you going to dive headlong into addressing those and confronting those at your game table? And then, of course, the discussion of how you would go about doing so with your players. And then we'll get into a bit about social classes. It's like, oh, okay, all right. And then all of a sudden we're into gas poisoning which was a thing in Victorian London, as well as the fog. And it's sort of like, okay, so how did we suddenly go from, all right, how do we address some troublesome things of the era? And then, oh, by the way, now we're into gas leaks. Okay. Then we get into our rules. We've got some rules for carriage chases. So it's got some tweaks to our chase rules from 7th edition, Call of Cthulhu. And then we'll get into the advice. So this is where I would have thought we would have had the little section about problematic content is in the new keeper advice or the keeper advice, not to start off the chapter, then suddenly we're into gas leaks and fog. Like I said, kind of a jumble here. Good stuff, but a jumble. And we'll get into information about theming your adventures, themes for your campaigns. I got to say, this is a great period if you're interested in folk horror. You can really do some cool things with Cthulhu by Gaslight if you're going to use this as a folk horror sort of role-playing game or theme some adventures with folk horror. Then we get using various different locales around England for your adventuring. So then we'll actually get into a section about notable Victorians. So we will get a lot of real life Victorians with stat blocks and some biographical information for them. We'll also get some fictional characters as well, which I thought was kind of cool. And one thing I thought was a little odd is that some of these entries are just completely historical information. So it's just basically giving you the breakdown of these people, their stat blocks, not for all of them, but for some of them. And then others are fictionalized. So some of the members of the Golden Dawn, like Aleister Crowley, have some fictionalization to them. And I thought that was odd. But if you're going to add some fictionalization to these characters, maybe how a keeper might utilize them in an adventure or a campaign, I would like to have seen it for all of these entries. Then we'll get into the fictional characters. We have She Who Must Be Obeyed, which is from the H. Rider Haggard novel, She. I thought she had a small role to play in King Solomon's Mines, but I might be misremembering. So love that. I think this is very cool. I think that this is an NPC, while fictional, could become a really cool big bad in a Cthulhu by Gaslight adventure. We get Captain Nemo, Dr. Moreau, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So I like that. I thought that was kind of cool. Next up, we'll dive into Victorian horrors. So this is both the mythos and occult in Victorian age England and Europe, really. And really interesting stuff here. I thought this was really cool. We get some different cults and what entities they might be devoted to. I thought this was very nicely done. We go beyond the mythos. Strangely enough, we get beast people. I thought that was kind of wild. And then we actually get the Martian invaders from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. I don't know why. I got to be honest, I don't remember if these were in previous editions of Cthulhu by Gaslight. Maybe. That is very possible. And they're just making another appearance. It is interesting that we even get a breakdown of the Martian invasion. But that was pretty cool. One of my other favorite fictional characters, which this is considered monsters. I would have thought maybe it would have gone into the fictional personages. We have Carmilla. I think that's how it's pronounced. The famous vampire story. So I thought that was very cool. Very nice. Frankenstein's monster. Actually, this is where Jekyll and Hyde are located. Spring-Heeled Jack. Of course, a fictionalized version of that. Then we'll move into our adventures. So we've got the Forsby Masterwork. Once again, I'm going to say spoiler-free, but let me say that this is a bit of an investigative adventure. It takes place in one location, and I will simply say, boy, you know what? There is this statue, it's a bronze statue of Icarus that, man, that's awfully lifelike. I wonder how the artist got such detail. Okay, that's a mini spoiler. And I would say that this first adventure, it says 1 or 2 sessions. I think this really leans towards 2. There's quite a bit going on in this adventure, and it is a nice tale that has a good amount of investigation built into it, but there are also some pretty spooky moments too. Then the second adventure is Oranges and Lemons, and I will say that this is my favorite out of the 2 adventures. And the reason behind it is that it's got a major theme of sickness, of illness. I'm not going to ruin the surprises of this adventure, but I'll tell you what, something that I know a lot of role players out there feel creepy about is sickness and illness. And if their characters become infected with some sort of virus or disease, it really does ratchet up the tension. Well, this is one of those sorts of adventures. So I like that quite a bit. We'll get into our appendices. So we've got Keeper resources. So we've got books, television, movies, internet resources. We've got some generic Victorians. So we'll get some stat blocks for a few of those. Then we get into our investigator sheets, our index, and some ads. And that will wrap up a peek inside Cthulhu by Gaslight's Keeper's Guide from Chaosium Inc. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. As I've already mentioned, production quality-wise, really nicely done. Nice, heavy paperweight. Artwork throughout is solid. Yeah, granted, there are a handful of images that I thought, oh, okay, that's not very exciting. But there is, at least to my naked eye, seemingly more occult and mythos related artwork in the Keeper's Guide than we saw in the Investigators Handbook. So that is a bonus. And the binding looks solid. We've got a couple of bookmarks, which of course my cat Mango had to start chewing on because, I don't know, it's like catnip to her. I was actually reading the book and she hopped up and it's like, what, really? Production quality, really nicely done. Like it quite a bit. As far as the content itself, there's a lot of excellent information in here. There are a lot of excellent options. I like the 2 adventures. I think they're very solid. I wouldn't say that they're spectacular, but they are good introductory adventures, and they are both very different from each other. So I like that quite a bit. Even just the approach in both of those adventures is a bit different. It's not just your typical, okay, it's a Call of Cthulhu adventure, so we start doing A, then B, then C, and then hopefully we've learned some things so we can progress to D. Little different approach to that. So I do like those as well. Strangely enough, this is kind of a jumble, though. The presentation is not always in a logical progression. As I've already pointed out, you'll be reading one section and then something pops up that seemingly doesn't have much to do with what you're reading about. Finish reading that, and then it's kind of back to the topic at hand. So it almost feels as if this was rushed, which it shouldn't be, because the Investigators Handbook for Cthulhu by Gaslight came out, well, at least a few hundred copies came out at Gen Con last year, which was in late July, early August. And then I want to say the book hit retail in September. There were a lot of folks who were very surprised that we did not get the Keeper's Guide then, or at least around then, that we've actually had to wait about 6 months to see the Keeper's Guide. Like I said, strangely enough, it does feel a little bit rushed. And something else I do need to tell you, even though Chaosium Inc. is promoting Cthulhu by Gaslight as a standalone role-playing game, that you do not need anything from 7th edition Call of Cthulhu in order to enjoy Cthulhu by Gaslight, I got a bit of a quibble with that. Because the reality is, if you combine the Investigators Handbook and the Keeper's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight, it feels incomplete. There's not a lot of information about the Cthulhu mythos in either of the books, which obviously in the Investigator's Handbook, you shouldn't see much. But in the Keeper's Guide, our information about the Lovecraftian mythos is light, very, very light. In fact, we have references to, say, Cthulhu, but we don't get into a description of Cthulhu itself. Nor do we see Nyarlathotep, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, and so forth, which I thought was kind of odd. If you take a look at the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu Keeper's Guide, that clocks in just under 500 pages. It's like 480, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that vicinity. I know it's more than 400. Yes, I also understand that there is a great amount of adventure content in that. But as far as an actual Keeper's Guide without the adventuring, there is still a ton of that content in there. All in all, I do like the Keeper's Guide. I will recommend the Keeper's Guide, but I also have to honestly tell you that I don't think as a standalone role-playing game that this carries the water like 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. I think if you take the Investigator's Handbook as well as the Keeper's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight, combine them together, this feels kind of light. It really, really does. Funny enough, you may not necessarily need to have the Investigator's Handbook for 7th edition Call of Cthulhu to get the most out of this. But I really do recommend that you have the Keeper's Guide for Call of Cthulhu and include that with the Cthulhu by Gaslight releases. I think you'll get the most out of it that way. And the role-playing game itself will feel far more complete. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Keeper's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight a 6.5 out of 10. Like I said, I like it. I have issues with it. And I don't really think that Cthulhu by Gaslight, the 2 books released, really stand well on their own as a horror role-playing game. I really don't, especially one that's supposed to be focused on the Lovecraftian mythos. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit gaminggang.com for our latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.